we are responsible for people's lives, and really to take that seriously. We impact their well-being, we impact their mental health, we impact their financial future, and it's not neutral. What we do or don't do matters deeply.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of She Owns Success. I'm Antoinette Olo, your host, and I'm super excited for this conversation that I have for you today. If you haven't joined me before, welcome for the first time. So happy to have you on board. And if you have, thank you so much for tuning in again. So in today's episode, I'm speaking to Maria DeLorenzis Reyes. Maria is an executive leadership coach. She works with business owners and CEOs and founders, and she helps them to achieve real transformation. She helps organizations to scale while also helping them to develop cultures that are conducive to mutual success. That's success for the organization as well as success for its people. Maria is a real advocate for rebel leadership. And that's something we talk about. What does it mean to be a rebel leader? Her experience really comes from training and development in the corporate space, as well as product management, project management, and also process reengineering. So a real kind of wealth of experience that she is able to bring to her clients in terms of helping them to scale. She's also the founder of the Scale Factor Formula. So she talks us through the Scale Factor Formula and how she's able to use that to help her clients to scale. And ultimately, we talk all things leadership, good and bad. So super excited for this conversation. Let's get into it. Hi, Maria. Thank you so much for joining me on She Owns Success. I'm so pleased to have you with us today. How are you?
I'm great. Thank you so much for having me. Very excited to sit and talk with you today.
Fantastic. And I'm super excited because this is a topic that I'm definitely passionate about. And I know that it's something that you are somewhat of an expert in and definitely passionate about as well. We're going to talk all about leadership. So You are the founder of Rebel Leadership. And we'll talk a little bit about kind of how you've come to be doing this work. But you've also got kind of a formula that you're using in terms of supporting your clients and helping them, whether they're entrepreneurs or whether they are kind of leaders within multi-million-dollar organizations, how you're helping them to kind of break through and be able to scale their organizations through improving their leadership.
Yes.
Fabulous.
Yes.
So I guess before we delve into kind of your business and the Scale Factor Formula, tell us a little bit about you. Who is Maria and kind of how did you come to be doing this important work?
Well, I started, like most in corporate America, I worked my way up in the advertising marketing for media. So selling advertising time and representing television stations, newspapers, radio stations. And through that, early on in my career, became a leader and became responsible for managing others. And I found through my own journey of being managed or led, and through my own work with leading a team, that the traditional model of leadership did not work. And so I took it upon myself to lead in a way that I really followed my instincts. I really relied on connection and relationship and building rapport and building a forum, a community, a safe space where people felt comfortable so that they were able to relax, bring their full selves to the table. And in truth, that was a trial and error effort. I was kind of on two sides of the coin where I was being led in a way that was not really ideal, but I was choosing to go against the grain and lead my people in a different way. And I saw the results of that. I saw that other teams were, people were unhappy. They were in downward spirals. There was people that were being fired or left. And I was really able to create great cohesion in the groups that I was leading, and no matter what company I went to. So that was like the pillar and the foundation of me unraveling and understanding that leadership was flawed in the traditional sense, in the traditional model, this corporate think that I call it, and business climate. And really the underlining thing that I really have come to out of my 20 years of working in corporate, I lost my job in the economic downturn. I was a senior manager and decided to go out on my own, kind of out of, really, okay, what am I going to do now? And so took my strengths and took that and built my own training company and then really started to lean into my passion about leadership and really changing the way we lead and the norms, and breaking these norms. And what I discovered was that this notion of rebel leadership was really, it really means not creating
Mm.
chaos for the spite of, just creating chaos. It's rejecting the outdated norms that don't work and doing things in a different way that really follow what people are longing for, and really that solve all of the problems that companies experience, where people don't
Mm.
stay, they're not loyal, all of those different things, they're not engaged, all those different things. And what I discovered, and I talk about this like all the time now, is the problem is that the way we get leaders is people are promoted because they're great at their job. They're not promoted because they're great leaders. And oftentimes, I run a training company today. I've run that for the last 17 years. There's no investment in building those leadership skills. And the behavior that is, observed, that's really like counterproductive and not effective, gets replicated over and over and over again. And I think overall, that's a very simple way to say it. That's why we're where we
Mm.
are. Of course, it's also business climate. The wrong things are rewarded.
Oh gosh. Yeah.
Behavior that is not conducive to creating, safe
Mm.
spaces and comfort and community. It's kind of like anti-business, but that's what people need in order to perform at their best and want to perform at their best. So that's really the journey of kind of, what I've tried to do is give you the journey of how I came to that, where I came from, running my own company now and helping other organizations see this. My mission is really to change the way we lead and change the world of work forever, to really change this norm, to have more people kind of following this rebel leadership framework that really will give them what they want. So that's kind of the history.
I love that so much. There's so much to kind of unpack around that and so much to delve into. I guess, firstly, you talked about rebel leadership as it compares to this the old norms and the old style of kind of leadership, and how, in terms of what leadership does, is it creates a certain kind of climate which then is conducive to actually the behaviors that the companies and organizations actually want from their staff. What would you,
Mm-hmm.
in terms of the work that you're doing or the work that you've done with clients of all kinds of organization sizes, what are some of the biggest, I guess, mistakes that
Yes.
you're seeing, and where you feel that there might be an easy fix, and it's just people are tripping themselves up in kind of not implementing these things?
Well, I think that's a great question. And I think the fundamental
Mm.
question there is how we get them to see that what they're doing is actually counterproductive to what they're trying to achieve. And that becomes a
Mm.
unraveling, right? And it becomes a exercise in identification of, like, basically the way I explain it is most people won't say I'm a terrible leader. you know, most people don't self-identify
Yes.
in this, and in their defense, it's also because there's this big
Mm.
machine, that's this norm, that's fighting them
Right.
to keep in that spot that they're in, and keep replicating this flawed
Mm.
model. So it's really to help them see that what they want, they are not getting, and that there's a direct correlation between their behavior and the bad outcome that they don't want. And once I get them to see that, then they can start to unravel and shake their head and say, oh, I see. Okay. So, yes, I'm kind of not really making the right choices in terms of, how I'm dealing with a onboarding somebody, for example.
Mm.
Many times the mistake, you asked me that, is they throw them, into the mix. They don't give the proper training. They don't onboard them properly. Then the support is not there, or the climate for someone to feel like they can ask questions, make mistakes, and get support to improve. There's this dysfunctional, community that's created and that they're operating in that doesn't work. So many times I see that over and over again. And sometimes it's not a function of the leader themselves.
Right.
It's a function of many times it's a function of the organization. And obviously that depends on how big it is. If it's very small, sometimes that's easier to fix. But sometimes when it's small, they're more stuck in that limited belief of they think they just have the wrong people and, they have to just fire everybody and hire good ones, and then when they see that just keeps happening, it's like, okay, who's the problem here? So
Something else is going on.
Yeah, I mean, it's really there's no silver bullet to solve it, but the first step is identifying that what you're doing is not working, and then being able to tie, or draw the lines, as I say, to this is what you want, this is what you're doing, you're not getting it. So here's how you might be able to get that. But they do have to shift their beliefs to understand that this outdated model of leadership and this business practice is not conducive. This new way is not really normalized to provide that. So it's a journey. And the best people that I work with are the ones that don't know what's wrong, but they know something's wrong and they're
Right.
missing something,
It sounds so simple, doesn't it? Because you would think that, isn't it obvious that there's something wrong? But one of the reasons I was so excited for this conversation is I've had a career spent in talent acquisition and the whole talent scene.
Mm-hmm.
And so I see it very much at that kind of front end where it's like, yes, we need new people because there's something wrong with these people. And obviously we can look at it from a different perspective and say, well, actually, I know the market. I know who's working in that company and who's over in that company. And these are good people. There's obviously something else happening. Or when you have kind of teams, say within a big organization where there's a churn. So it's like that person's basically constantly hiring. The hiring just never ends, not because the team is growing,
Yes.
but because actually there's other things that are going on. And it's quite challenging, which is for me, which is where this whole understanding of how critical it is to have good leadership is. And also you touched on onboarding, that piece is so important as well, because obviously kind of HR may play a part in that, but actually that leader within that, that team, it's such a massive thing where regardless of what they've gone through with HR, this is the person that's leading them. And if they kind of get thrown in because they're a senior person and they've been brought in and they're the expert, they can just get on with it. It's never a good start, is it? Because people still need some level of kind of that introduction and kind of setting the scene within that new organization for sure.
Yeah, for sure. And, it's interesting because, again, as you mentioned, the different levels or the different sizes of companies. Obviously, a smaller organization, they tend to be a little bit more lean and they have less structure. That's pretty typical.
Mm-hmm.
But I also find that even bigger companies, it's very common that companies grow quickly and then they're not reinvesting back into like the foundation and the infrastructure that, as you said, this is not a quick fix kind of thing. There has to be a holistic approach to it, looking at the culture, looking at the onboarding, looking at, what do we stand for? Who are we about? What kind of people are we finding that match that? How do we communicate that? Because that's another thing,
Mm-hmm.
My generation, we were very different than the two generations that are making up the biggest part of the workforce now, millennials and Gen Z. They want something very different. And we
Yes.
could, as employers, as leaders, as companies, we could complain, we could lament about these generations are different. But really, that's a waste of time because we're not going to change the fact that these are the people that we're going to be finding, to place in those positions and fill those talent roles and bring them in. So we have
Mm.
to acknowledge that what they want has changed. So therefore, if we want to be successful, we have to change that environment and that culture. And quite frankly, I think it's what everybody has wanted what
Mm,
I'm talking about. It's just that we are at this point now where people are recognizing and talking about it finally. I don't think we
definitely.
are at the place where we see, sweeping changes. I think it's going to take a little bit more of a fight, to do that. Um, but I am, for sure on a mission to just continue to contribute to sharing this message, opening more eyes and making people see that it's possible to change things. And it's not just nice stuff. That's the other thing. People are
Mm,
like, oh, I have to get to know my people. Like, I have to be, friendly. Uh-huh. Like, you've got to bring the humanity back into work because we are humans. And as much as people say about AI and tech, yes, it's going to revolutionize the way we work and the way companies get things done, but you're going to still need human beings. There's just
mm,
no way around it. And so I think that, the more that these type of messages, the more I can talk about it, the more I can kind of open people's eyes, and all of us doing this type of work, the more that there's going to be some shift. And sometimes it might be kicking and screaming, okay, I got to do this. But when you see the results of it, then you go, oh, okay, maybe they were right.
definitely, definitely. One of the things you mentioned was about the fact that we've got the different generations now within teams and within organizations. Talk to me about, I guess, when you've gone into a client site, whether it's a small company or large organization, with this fact that we do have the different generations working together, what sorts of challenges or new things is that raising? And I guess then, what does that mean in terms of leading an intergenerational team as well?
That's a great question, and one that I hope more and more companies are investing in, to be, or yeah, investing in order to really understand that. Because I think when it all comes down to it, what has to be done is there has to be an effort that we are, as a company, as a leader, breaking down the biases about different generations. I think what becomes difficult is many and alike, Gen Z thinks something about Gen X, millennials think something about Gen Z, and Gen X thinks something about those two other generational groups. And we really have to not stay stuck in those stereotypes, in those narratives that are out there. And we have to bring a different understanding to each other, to really get to know each other and to understand the reasons why, right? We talk about, Gen Z and millennials. What have they watched? They've watched their parents
Mm,
lose their jobs. They've watched, the companies, all, hail to the shareholder and make decisions that have impacted human lives. And they don't see loyalty from companies. So they're going in with that bias, but it really is for good reason because they've seen it. So as a company, we've got to address that. As leaders, we've got to address that. We've got to know that that generation has a different view. So we really have to break down the bias of the older generations, looking at them like they're lazy, they don't want to work, they, all of these things that people say, and vice versa. For Gen Z and millennials to look at the Gen X and, the baby boomers who are left. I think most of them have retired out, but that they come with what's the pro and what's the benefit and what's the value in each of those groups. Those older generations have been around, they know more, they have wisdom, but those generations can't act like they know it all, and somebody younger can't bring a new idea, can't bring a better solution. So it's about allowing that community or that forum to address those biases. And obviously, I have a training company, so I wish more companies would do generational training awareness
mm,
because people don't necessarily do that on their own. Any kind of
mm,
bias, we don't necessarily break that down on our own. There are some of us who work on that and are very aware of that, but not everybody does. So that's critical to this multi generational workforce to be able to get along, acknowledge each other's strengths and differences. Um, in a accepting way, not a judgmental way, and really be
Definitely.
able to find how we combine those groups in the best way possible.
So I guess from what you've said, it's something that is needed, but actually, how many companies are investing in that? It's probably not as many as probably should or ought to, for sure, definitely. And would you say, as a training company, that that probably goes across training in general anyway?
Yes. That's the thing that I've seen. And listen, I can speak from the US standpoint. I'm not
Mm,
sure if it's the same, in other countries in the UK and other countries in the world. But here in the US, what I've witnessed in my 35 years of working, right, in business is I saw in the end of my corporate career and even starting my own training company that companies started this, doing things that look good on paper, this, short term, like how do we take care of the shareholders? How do we increase our profit margin? Which, of course, is important. I always like to say that because, excuse me, um, of course, that's important because a lot of people come at me and say, well, your company's got to make money. Of course. But the thing is that to do away with training and do away with things, I saw that climate, in the really in like the after the economic downturn and even just before it,
mm,
we started to see a lot of that being peeled away. And I think it's this ultra short termism that we've adopted, here in this country. Maybe it's the same in the UK where we are driving everything to how do we cut
yes.
cost. And yes, we need to do that as organizations. We need to be intentional about where we're putting our resources. But there is also this thing that I call the cost of not doing something.
Mm,
You've got to consider that. And the best way I've ever seen it phrased, and I use this a lot when I talk about this, is, and this is a little bit stereotypical, but the CFO, that's the chief financial officer, is always looking at the dollars and cents, right? And they say, what if we train people and they leave,
oh gosh, that's so common, isn't
right?
it?
Very common. But the CEO, I'll say the enlightened
Mm,
CEO, will say, well, what if we don't train them and they
yeah.
stay? It's your company. It's your business. And I see this at all levels. It's not just small business. It's Fortune 500 companies where they cut things that are not directly tied to revenue
Oh
producing.
gosh, yeah.
They want to see put a nickel in, get a quarter
Yeah.
out. Like, it doesn't work that way. Sometimes there's things that have to be done that are a holistic investment in making the whole thing
Mm,
work, right? And training is one of those things. So it's funny because I love that you asked me this because I can delve into this that I've seen. I saw that resistance as I was starting my training company and also coming out of corporate. But I also saw it more and more that I started to provide services that were more consulting
mm,
based, consulting arrangement. They wanted, strategy and assessment and how do we get better efficiency and, optimize the organization and etc. And I do plenty of that work and I'm capable of doing that. But a lot of times they do that because they think that training is a waste of money. That's like I've had people say that it's a waste of
yeah.
money. Or, it'll cost me more money to train people than to just have you come in and tell me what to fix and help us fix it. That's not really
No.
true. And most of the times when I would go and assess a problem and they would say what it is, and I would do some investigation and work with some of the people and try to come up with a recommendation, guess what? Training was a part of the solution. So, again, I think unfortunately it is part of this climate that we're in
Mm,
where we're so focused on the profit margin. And again, profit margin is important, but there is a cost of not doing things that's affecting your profit margin. Many things can be an investment that will pay off.
mm,
That will pay off because especially when we have to do with, and you mentioned your work with talent acquisition, like people leaving is a very costly thing for a company,
honestly.
right? It's a very costly thing, and there's a metric that I use all the time. At least this is a U.S. based. more than 50% of workers that leave a position say, I mean, obviously there's lots of things, but it's the underlying issue is they felt like they didn't belong.
Mm.
What is that seeing? You know, they felt like they didn't have that community, that they weren't supported, that they couldn't make mistakes and learn and grow, that the company wasn't looking for a way to be mutually successful. That's kind of like a no-brainer,
Yeah.
right? Like that's kind of simple, but it's become so elusive to many companies and leaders. And yeah, it's a real big problem that I'm hoping that we see change soon.
It's interesting because there is so much well, I guess the development and training is obviously very much within HR, a huge part of kind of business growth strategy, and also kind of talent is a huge part of that. It's all people, isn't it? And the thing is, there's
Yeah.
so much kind of parallel with everything you're saying from this training and development piece and the cost of it, of not doing it, sorry, with what the conversations that I've had constantly, regardless of the size of the organization around talent. So just a couple of examples where one, it's, as you said, the cost of losing that person because you didn't train them or you didn't do anything to kind of nurture them or help make them feel, like this is where they want to be. You think, well, they're not the
Yes.
right person then, let's just bring the next one in. But actually, you've spent just by being there and doing the job, they're learning. They've got all that knowledge. They've got all of that cultural stuff that they're going to go with. And also, let's face it, most positions and vacancies remain open for a substantial period of time. And so all of that time when nobody's doing that, it's like the impact, of the things that are
Yeah.
maybe getting done by someone else who shouldn't be doing it or who isn't as good at doing it,
Yes.
other people getting stressed, all of that stuff.
Yes.
It's a nightmare. And then obviously the other thing is I will say, look, you're better off retaining talent than going out and bringing in new people, which is funny because, I've worked in talent acquisition, but I always say the best strategy is to nurture the ones that are here because they are your best bet. You know that they fit, you know that they get how things work here. But there's so many kind of constant conversations around actually, that they want this or they want that. And is it really worth it when we can just let them go? Because, if we give it to them, somebody else might be unhappy and we might then have to start giving this and that to everybody. And it's like, well, honestly, you're better off. It's actually cheaper than now going out to market, having that position open, having nobody doing the job, bringing somebody in who is a risk. They may or may not work out. And also, you're probably going to have to pay that person more, which is just how things often are. And it is just that constant conversation. It's very interesting because I've been in places where they get it and they are amazing at retaining people. And interestingly, when you say, people worry about if I train them, which is true, they'll leave. But actually, if they do leave, they're your best brand ambassador. That person's going to go out and say,
right.
that place is fantastic. They do this, they do that, they do all these things. So
That's
when it does come time to bring people in, everybody's banging the door down because people want to join and it's not kind of tumbleweed. And you're thinking, why does nobody want to come here? Because the word on the street is you don't really appreciate your people.
100%. And that's the thing. That's that impact that we're talking about where it's not a direct line for here's the line item and here's the benefit from that. It's this holistic impact of one thing affects another. And for this perfect mix of things. And what you said is so important, where back when I started working, less of an issue because we didn't have things like social media. We didn't have all this. Now, your reputation is everything as a company. And as you said, brand ambassadors for your company, even if they left, could be the best investment you ever made. Because you don't want people to say, it stinks over there, horrible, don't work there. You want people to say, great company to work for, etc. And that's out there and that lives on forever. And that also, just a side note, is it should be something that we all cared about. But my generation was, told, suck it up. Now these two other generations, Gen Z and millennials, they won't. They won't. And, that's the other thing that I wanted to bring up is, again, I'm speaking for the U.S. because I don't know the economic structure or the history of employment in the UK or anywhere else in the world. But, My father's generation was very different, right? And
Mm.
they're the ones that many times, baby boomer, they're very critical about the other three generations or maybe the younger two. But things were so different at the beginning of my working career was when profit sharing and pensions, all that kind of went out of the private sector.
Mm.
That was just the beginning. And I remember, in my early years of working, where most of my department, I had 10 managers underneath me and about 100 people collectively in my department that I ultimately was responsible for. But all of the managers, we were hiring a lot of people that was an entry level job. They were starting at the very beginning of their career, just out of college. And they would get very upset when someone would leave. And to your point earlier, like that's every position and every job. Like it takes about 6 months before they can actually do the
Yes.
job, before they're any good, is what people used to say. Because there's all training and acclimation and all of that thing that you invest in. So for them to, after a year, to leave, it's detrimental, right? And they would get mad. The managers would get mad. I'm like, oh, can you believe she's leaving? She's going to a competitor, and it's only for another $1,000 a year. And I'd say, I don't blame her. What is it that we have here that's keeping her, making her stay? Now, yes, I do believe in creating a climate where people want to stay, where it's beyond the money, right? But what I'm pointing
100%.
out is, in my dad's generation, he worked for the same company for 35 years. Why? Was it was it because they were nice to him? Partly, but he also had a lot vested in his pension,
Mm.
and that if he left, he had a lot to lose. We are not in that climate. We haven't been for a very long time. And at least here in the States, with what companies have done to get out of giving benefits,
Mm.
and hiring people as contractors
Yeah.
instead of W-2 staff, and all of those tricks to save money and save cost, they've kind of created this climate where people are like, it's not worth it to me. I can go here and make more money. I can do gig work and make more money. So it's almost like a self sabotaging exercise that now we've created this climate here, and it is what it is. So am I saying, okay, all the companies have to go back to what they used to do? No, but you do have to acknowledge that that's a factor in creating a experience where somebody feels like, I want to stay here. And what are all of those things that are going to make that happen? Most of it, most of it is how you treat them every single day. And it's basic stuff. You care and you show care and concern for
Mm.
them. You invest in them. You know, most people, when I ask them, why did you stay at a place so long or work for somebody for so long? Most of the response at the bare minimum is because I felt like my boss really cared about me, like
Yes.
really cared about what happened to me, really cared about my future. Yeah. Like
Exactly.
it's really pretty simple. It's not just about the money, right?
Yes.
If you have that, okay, where it's just about the money, then we're a
Mm.
commodity, right? And then there's things that just won't happen with that kind of model. So it is a reality that I think we have to understand about where we are. And that's a question for you. Is it the same in the UK? Have things fallen out of the private sector that used to exist to keep people at places
They're
longer?
definitely, we've got these 0 hour contracts that came in. So, there's not,
Yeah.
you're not committing to that person. So there are definitely those things that have happened. And because of all of those sorts of things, they say that, well, it gives more opportunities for people to work, but actually they haven't got any guarantees. That's the thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, those
Yeah.
things definitely have happened. And 100%, I think for a long time now, I say since like 2008, things have been not necessarily on the on the up and up in terms of the kind of financial situation per se. And then COVID,
Yeah.
I think it's just really compounded everything.
Yes.
So a lot of the
Yeah.
speak is definitely about, well, that's not really adding to the bottom line, so we need to stop doing that.
Yeah.
So 100%, yeah, definitely, everybody's kind of basically looking at that bottom line a lot more, for sure.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think,
Yeah. And go
no,
ahead.
yeah, I was going to just say, to kind of echo what you've just said, it's one of the things that I do find really difficult is when, as someone in the kind of talent world, I know that there are so many things that you can offer people that are not monetary. That's the thing. And I
Yes.
think sometimes I find
Yes.
it very interesting. Like, if you just offered these things and not kind of giving them directly more money, these people would stay. And I think with things like COVID, I know I keep talking about it, but I think it did create kind of a shift in people, didn't it? Because of the things that went on,
Yes, it did.
people suddenly woke up and thought, hold on, what could happen tomorrow? And so these types of
Yes.
things are important more than ever to people now, because it helps them to feel that actually I am living a bit more of a whole experience and whole life, even if I am working a lot.
Yes.
And I think
Yes.
companies, I think they don't necessarily always appreciate that. And what's interesting as well, I have known some organizations that really get it. And honestly, I've known organizations
Same.
where they weren't the best payers, they weren't, paying people the greatest, they didn't give them, the best this, that, and the other. But honestly, people stayed there. Like, there were so many people
Yeah.
that had years and years of tenure. And if you speak to them and say,
Yeah.
why do you stay here? And a lot of the time, funnily enough, with what you do, it was often the opportunity for development, the opportunity for training. They feel that actually they're getting opportunities to learn this, do that, move here, do whatever it might be. And I think that
Mhm.
a lot of places just still don't necessarily grasp that, like how important that is to people to feel that they are.
Yes.
I think as humans, we just want to grow, don't we? We want to feel we're able to grow.
Yeah. Yeah, that's a great point, and I'm so glad you mentioned that because it really is true. Like, some people might form the attitude like, well, we can't do what companies used to do and give out tons of, things that cost us money. It's
Exactly.
not necessarily that. And especially, we talked about that earlier with these two generations coming up, Gen Z and millennials. They want different things
Appreciation.
from a job experience. Yes. And as you said, and I wholeheartedly stand by this. I think COVID shifted that for a lot of us,
Mm,
even the Gen Xers, because it made us question, what are we doing
mm,
here? You know, and the way you said it is best. It's you want that experience, that holistic experience. It's not just about my paycheck, because you could be
mm.
miserable and be making plenty of money, and money's
Of
important. I'm not going
course.
to say that it's not, but it's not just that. It's actually those other things that are more important to keep somebody
Mm,
there, that people feel like they are being successful, that they are being cared for, that they are being invested in, and that it's that holistic experience. I mean, listen, we spend a lot of time at work,
mm.
right?
Yes.
And so that's another thing that you got to be acknowledged. And something you said earlier that I wanted to follow up on, the impact of people leaving that it has on the people that remain, right?
Yeah.
That in itself, just replacing somebody is so costly, but the physical cost, the emotional cost, the mental cost, and eventually it could make you lose other people, because I've seen it happen many times where then you have one person who's covering and doing the job of the person who left, or several people, and the burden that remains on the rest of the organization and the staff. And we have a big problem with people with burnout, and it's something that has to get addressed. And if you're creating that in your climate because of that impact of people leaving all the time, that's not going to end well.
Mm.
you know?
Yes. No,
No.
definitely. This burnout thing is real, isn't it? In terms of when people bring you in, then, um, are there commonalities in terms of the types of issues that you're getting, that you're coming into? Is it, is there, when do, because as you said, companies probably aren't rushing to get people to have training. So by the time they come to you, it's probably critical. So what's causing people,
Yes.
what is it that usually makes them actually take that step?
Well, a lot of times and now this is particularly now. I'm hoping this will shift back to the way it used to be when I first started, where people are actually coming to me for the training. Now it's typically it's I always start with they have some kind of issue,
Mm-hmm.
right? They have some kind of issue that they're experiencing. It could be that they need help in hiring. It could be that they need help with onboarding. It could be that they have issues with staff performance. It could be that their leadership is
Mm-hmm.
flawed, that they recognize that they're having a problem with a particular leader or whatever. But many times, many times, not always, many times, what they think is the problem is actually not the
Right.
problem. So through the needs analysis and through the discussion, and this is something I say all the time that's kind of funny, but I really don't need to spend a lot of time um, either observing or asking questions to identify and kind of diagnose, because it's always the same things. It's like the things they're saying to me. It's like, okay, well, we can't find anybody. Like, we've hired 3 times and we've had to fire them, and they didn't perform. And it's like, okay, that could be 3 things: lack of training and onboarding, bad leadership, and not clear performance, expectations. Right.
Right.
So that's like, I'm like, okay, I guarantee that that's part of the problem. Or sometimes I've had one company I went into where they say, oh, the people we have, they're just not very good. Well, it wasn't that.
They're all of them.
it was it was the leadership and it was the training. It was like, and you ask the questions like, okay, so what do you do when you hire somebody
Mm.
new? Like, well, this is what we do. We show them how to do the job, and then they can't do it on their own. It's like, okay, and you do that training for how
Mm.
long? Like, somebody just shows them how to do, and it was manufacturing, so it was operating machinery, which is a safety issue.
Gosh,
So
yes.
got to make sure somebody's trained really well, right? Okay, well, um, where is the way that they can reinforce their training? Where do you have videos? Do you have like checklists? Do you have any other support, or are you just showing them? Well, guess what? They were just showing them, and it's like, okay, that's not the problem. So it's really interesting because it's so common. It doesn't matter what industry. It doesn't matter the size of the company. The problems are always the same. And it always comes down to either onboarding and training, leadership or culture, or both. And really just the whole performance management part of it. And what I mean by that is sometimes people who are not doing their job is because they haven't clearly been told what their job is, or how they know they're meeting expectations, the measurement, the system, the infrastructure that supports that, so that they know that it's missed the mark. And I think I said that earlier, where it's really common, where companies, even big companies, small companies, yes, they grow quickly and they usually don't reinvest in the infrastructure. But guess what? Big companies too. The every time they scale to another level, there needs to be a reinforcement and a readjustment of the infrastructure to make sure that it supports that new level.
Mm-hmm.
And I find so often that that is so missed, that is what then ends up creating some of these problems.
Mm-hmm.
Like, oh, I don't get it. We were so great before and we had 50 people. Now we've added 100. We're doing more sales, but we're making less money.
Right.
Okay. It's not just about cost. It's probably has to do with this ecosystem that hasn't been up leveled to be able to support that. And that's in the leadership and culture. That's in the training, the onboarding, the hiring practices, and the ability for people to understand what's the expectation and how do I
Mm.
communicate that to them. And, you said earlier about people that aren't performing, right? And people wanting to get rid of them. I said that too. There is so much value in being able to turn someone around that might
Mm.
not be hitting the mark. And in order to do that, we as leaders and as companies have to first look at ourselves, right? We have to put the mirror up to ourselves and say, okay, what's off? What do we need to do differently here? What might we have missed? And being able to solve that and turn somebody around is, first of all, so great for the company, right? Because you've not created a vacancy that then you have to fulfill, and all the things we've mentioned about the trickle down effect, about how that impacts the rest of the organization and the team. But the ability for that person to then sometimes become the star performer,
Oh, yeah.
and for the leadership to be a part of that and the company to be a part of that is the best outcome. And that's what we should hope for, not getting rid of somebody. Sometimes that's
Of
necessary. I'm not
course.
going to say that it's not, but it's too often the quick fix, the solution that people come up with. And really, what ends up happening is it's like you're treating a sore throat with cough drops instead of getting to the root cause and solving it by, taking the antibiotics. You've got to get to the root cause, or it's not going to be solved. You're just going to have the same problem over and over again.
I love that. Before we go on, the next thing I definitely want to talk about is your kind of your formula, because you have a formula, and I think everybody's going to want to know kind of what it is and how it works. But before I do, one of the things I was going to say was you mentioned kind of the main things, the main three areas that is always the issue. Does communication kind of come into that? Because I feel like everywhere I go, all the issues I see, it's like somewhere along the line, communication is always part of this issue. And one of the things you've mentioned, or that I've heard you kind of reinforce, is also this kind of thing about systems and having these systems and processes nailed down. But
Yes.
this communication piece, how have you found that to be?
Yeah, I mean, communication, especially in today's
Mm,
world, is often they miss the mark. I think there's a lot of assumptions that companies make, that they think that the emails or the Slack messages and all the things that we rely on. And I'm not saying we need to get rid
mm,
of those, but there always an over reliance on those, and that communication then is not
mm.
clear. We have to have a better way to ensure clarity and communication. And I could talk for days about this. The one thing I'll say in short is that we're not going to throw email and instant messaging and Slack or whatever it is out the window, but we do have to understand that that mode of communication is flawed in itself. And the reason why is because when you look at communication principles, the way we communicate, what's the three things that are made up of that are obviously the words, body language, and voice tone. Those three things. Well, in any written communication, email, Slack message, text, the only thing you have is the words.
Mm.
So words represent 7% of how we communicate. Body language is 38%, and voice tone is 55%. So, what does that mean? There's so much room for miscommunication. And I mean, like every time I do a training on this and I say, who's ever had an email misinterpreted? Everybody raises their hand. Who's ever had a text message misinterpreted? Because you don't have the measure of the voice tone and the body language to see what the intention of the words are. You need all that together. So, again, what are we going to do? Throw that out the window? No, but we have to acknowledge that that's our climate. And if we're over relying on that, there's going to be a lot of miscommunication. There's going to be a lot of misinterpretations. So, the communication system has to be holistic and in a way that is a great balance to hit all of the marks of how we ensure interpretation of messages and that we pick the right mode. Obviously a Slack message is great for a quick thing or a quick update, but if it's understanding maybe some big restructuring changes, maybe some
Mm.
big initiatives, we've got to have some more human connection. And that also relies on leaders. So often we have leaders that are relying on just those quick ways to communicate with their team. I know everybody hates this when we say it, but you've got to have some one-on-ones where you're meeting face to face. It doesn't have to be for hours, but it does have to be part of the communication mix. And especially because of this climate, that we're in. On top of that, we have so much disruption, in our day with all of the wonderful tools that have come our way, that are distracting us, interrupting us. So that impacts communication and understanding as well. So I see that everywhere, and I'm not going to say that there aren't companies who've done an excellent job of that or leaders that have done an excellent job of that. I have seen that. But I think it's a real area where there's a big deficit and that there's not enough attention or awareness of this issue. Which this is the one thing I'll say to close with. If your communication is not succinct, if your communication is not clear, here's what happens. People start making up the stories on their own. And that creates complete dysfunction, not just in initiatives and getting work done, but also affects your culture, affects your commitment, affects people's loyalty, because they're not getting the clear message and understanding or interpreting what you intended. And again, that's whether that's on a project, whether that's on your performance, whether that's on company changes, whether that is on good or bad and bad news. Like that's the other thing. To get bad news in an email, no, no. Like companies have ups and downs. There has to be that commitment to communication for the ability to ensure that the messages are getting through and getting interpreted in the way we intended.
Thank you so much. So let's talk about then your formula, the scale factor formula.
Okay, so the scale factor formula I came up with because in my years in corporate and in building my own business and working with companies in my own company, my own organization and doing this work, what I found, and I've alluded to this a little bit in a lot of things we talk about, what I found is that every company that's trying to, and everybody's talking about scale, everybody wants to scale. First of all, there's a misinterpretation and a misunderstanding of what scale actually is. Scaling doesn't just mean growing, right? Scaling means growing in sales or revenue, but without the same incremental cost to support that. Because if you're going from a, I don't know, make it up, $5 million company to a $10 million company in revenue, if the cost to support that 10 million is equal, your profit margin is going to be the same. Your profit is going to be the same. So what's the point of scaling, right? It's being able to optimize and grow the revenue without that same leap in the cost and the cost to support that or do that. So that's the first thing, is that I wanted to cut right through that so people understood what scale meant. But I also found that there was this great appetite for scaling. And every CEO, every leader, every entrepreneur, especially, entrepreneurs, founders, they wanted to know how to scale. They need to understand what it means, but they also need to understand that it's this holistic approach that is going to accomplish that. And what I found is that not just with companies that I worked with or even my own company, even in my corporate days working inside million and billion dollar companies that try to get to that next level, there's usually one of 5 things, I call them scale factors, that stops them, that blocks them from doing that. And I've taken my experience and distilled it down to these 5 areas that usually get in the way. Well, a lot of it is what I've already talked about, but I've made it in this framework that people could understand and people could get around. It is obviously aligning with vision. If you don't have a vision and everybody doesn't know what it is, then you cannot ensure that the actions that people are taking are aligned with that vision for you to attain it. So that's number 1. I've talked to a lot of founders that have a vision, but nobody else knows what it is. So that's pretty clear, right? And maybe in bigger companies, that's a little more clear, but I worked for a $60 million company and we didn't have that defined, So I think it's not like a given that you're big, you're going to have that. Like you have to make sure you have that. The second is to engage your people. And it's all the things we've been talking about. How do you engage them? It's you empower them, you invest in them, creating that culture. A lot of these things are, I would say, combined, like if you don't have one, it impacts the other. But I've tried to do it in a way that people could get their head around it and what we were talking about. The third is to multiply your reach. You have to find a way. I worked in product development. How do you create that next product, that next service that's going to help you grow, or expand to another geographic area? That's going to allow you to grow your revenue without increasing the cost at the same incremental. That's a critical factor. Innovating systems. You've got to have continuous improvement. You've got to innovate your systems, automate things. And that's, again, this reinvestment back into the infrastructure to support that next level. And lastly, build and lead the team. So how do you build it? Again, if you're probably getting from me right now, all of these little themes have to do with everything we spoke about. It's not only hiring in the right way, it's onboarding, it's leading with great communication, with great leadership, rebel leadership that creates that environment and that culture where people want to stay. So the reason why I did this is not because necessarily that's my passion. Leadership and culture is my passion. Changing the way we work, we lead and work forever. That's it. But what I found was because people don't self-identify that I'm the problem, it's me, like the Taylor Swift song, a lot of times it's the CEO and the founder. So I had to find a way to kind of lead them to bring the horse to the water, so to speak. So by giving them what they wanted, the scaling, right? This appetite, and it is giving them what they want, but it's also giving them what they need. And my hope is that through that, they make that transition to understand where the issues are. And I do that through identifying the problems that they are experiencing and then drawing the lines to the why. So I can get them behind, okay, this is not just how do we get more sales? This is a holistic rehaul, restructure that I've got to make a commitment to invest in if I want to get to that next level.
I love that. Thank you so much for kind of explaining that so clearly, and also for clearly kind of stating what scaling is, because I'm sure many people think that it's just growing, basically, growing your revenue or growing your size or both. But actually, as you say, commonly
it's
used.
become such a buzzword, right? It's become such a buzzword that we've lost the understanding of what it truly means. So that's important to understand.
Fantastic. So I guess this has been such a fantastic conversation, and I think you've given us so many kind of nuggets of gold. So for anybody who's listening, who are your ideal clients? Who do you work with? What kind of stage are they in terms of their organization or their leadership or their business, if they're kind of an entrepreneur or a founder?
That's a great question. Whether they are a founder, CEO, or they're working inside a corporation, that is at least in the $3 to $5 million mark, that has a team of 10 or more, and that is understanding they want to be able to either admittedly change the way they're leading and change things, or they know there's some issue where they're not optimized and they want to be able to dissect that and understand that. Any of the things that I've mentioned would help to do that. But also, these are my favorite, the founders or the CEOs or the business leaders that say, I want to be a rebel leader. I could relate to what you're saying. That's been my experience, but how do I do it? So those are my kind of ideal client mix, if you will.
I love that. And we want more rebel leaders. So definitely I'm wanting plenty of people to be getting in touch with you, because I think the world needs more rebel leaders for sure, given kind of how you described a rebel leader. What's the best way for everybody to get in contact with you? Kind of where are you based in terms of, I guess, where's your home online?
Yeah. So where's my home online? LinkedIn. I have a big presence on LinkedIn. You can connect with me with that way. Maria DeLorenzis Reyes. I also am at the Maria DR on Instagram. And I also could be contacted through my personal website, which is mariadr.com. Any of those three ways would be ways to get in touch with me and be able to connect.
Fantastic. And of course, we will be linking all of those things in the show notes. What is the kind of final message then that you want to leave with leaders that are currently kind of growing in their leadership, growing teams, building businesses, anybody who would identify themselves as a leader, or even somebody who's an aspiring leader? What would you want to leave them with?
Yes, thank you. I think the message is that I'd like more people to understand the impact and the responsibility that we have as leaders. We are responsible for people's lives, and really to take that seriously. We impact their well-being, we impact their mental health, we impact their financial future, and it's not neutral. What we do or don't do matters deeply. And the more of us that take that responsibility seriously and go in a against the grain kind of direction, I believe the more we can impact the world. Because if we are impacting these humans, that is going to have an impact on their family, that is going to have an impact on their role in society, how they show up in their communities. And that doesn't matter what level you are. You said an aspiring leader, but also just somebody who is a natural leader who's looking out for people to the left and the right of them. Like, the more that we take on that responsibility, which really is a gift, but the responsibility, that's what we need right now in the world. And the more of us that do that, I think the greater impact we can have.
Thank you so much, Maria. That is such a fantastic and powerful message to leave everybody with. And you're right, one of the things we didn't touch upon, which is the fact that we can all step into leadership positions, regardless of whether you have that kind of leadership title in your career or otherwise. Yes. So definitely something to keep on board, keep in mind for everybody. Thank you so much. It's been so fantastic to talk to you. I really, really appreciate your time and all of the kind of wisdom and all of the information that you've provided us. Hopefully people are going to start taking these things to heart and actually implementing some of the things that we've talked about here today.
Thank you so much, Antoinette, for having me. And thank you. I've loved our conversation. It's been a pleasure.
I hope you enjoyed that episode. I found that absolutely incredible. I love talking to Maria. And I think her mission is so powerful and so important. Well, it's more important than ever, I believe. So don't forget, if you enjoyed this episode, if you found it valuable, please hit the like and subscribe buttons if you are watching us, because we're on YouTube now. Otherwise, do subscribe if you're listening. And I really look forward to seeing you in the next one. Definitely get in contact with Maria, check out her site, because there are so many different ways in which you can work with her. But for now, have a fantastic week, and I'll catch you in the next one.